morning, noon, nighttime. We're all over the world right now. It's pretty fun. This is the launch of our Interfaith Statement that was born out of the 5 different dialogues over the course of this spring. We brought together people from across tradition, the world, industry, to have a real conversation about our food systems, about equity and justice. How do we transform them to meet the moment, both of within the climate crisis, but within the crisis within our food systems as they are right now? There's a lot to do, and there's a lot of amazing people doing it. And so it's a real pleasure to be here today with you all, and with some of the speakers, as well as the coalition who helped bring these dialogues into fruition. So because we only have an hour, I am going to hold here, and I'm going to hand it over to my colleague and friend, Gopal Patel, who's going to share a little bit about how these dialogues came into be, their purpose, and kind of, the process of how we got to here. So Gopal, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and good morning, afternoon, evening to all of you. Thank you for being us, as Andrew said, for the launch of the Faith and Food Systems Summit Interfaith Statement. It's great to see so many familiar faces and friends together again. As we know, with the Food Systems Summit, there was a mechanism with the summit to make it a people's summit for organizations to host dialogues, independent dialogues, that was supported by Arnie, who I see there, and his team at 4SD. And so we took that invitation, and a number of us from different faith-based organizations around the United Nations came together and put together a coalition called the Food and Faith Coalition. I'll just mention who those initial coalition members were. Obviously, there were the Center for Earth Ethics at Union Theological Seminary, the World Evangelical Alliance, Bibi Global, which is the organization I run, the Parliament of World Religions, the Interfaith Public Health Network, the Islamic Medical Association of North America, and the Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation. And what we did is that we saw that there was an opportunity to bring the voices of faith, of beliefs and values through the mechanism of the independent dialogues to the Food Systems Summit. And so, as Andrew mentioned, over the course of the spring, in May and June, we hosted 5 multilateral dialogues that examined our food systems through the lenses of faith and values. And each of the dialogues that we hosted corresponded to one of the 5 action tracks that the summit had outlined. The dialogues brought together over 40 different faith leaders, activists, indigenous advocates, farmers, workers, and policymakers to gather insights and develop recommendations to feed into the summit. Over 1,500 people participated and watched those dialogues through our live streams on Zoom, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And these individuals represent a global community of major faith groups, advocacy organizations, farmers, indigenous communities, and NGOs. And their contributions and questions were essential to the success of the dialogues. And as I mentioned, we posted each dialogue online, and through the 4SD independent dialogue format, submitted our reports into the summit itself. What also came out of the dialogues, which is what we're here to launch and celebrate today, is an interfaith statement that draws upon each of these 5 dialogues, the contributions of all the 40 different speakers and the organizations they represent. And we'll go into the statement in a bit and the number of signatories, but this is really a monumental moment because it shows that faith-based organizations are not just saying good things and nice things, but are getting into the detail, into the nuts and bolts of policy. And that's really what we want to do with these dialogues, bring together different stakeholders and not just shake each other's hands and say we're all nice and we all believe in the same thing, but actually what can the world of faith bring to the real challenge of reforming our food systems to meet the challenges of the coming decade and beyond. So we're very excited to have all of you here today and to launch the statement, and I'll hand it back over to Andrew.
Thank you so much, Go Paul. And so I'm going to put a link into the chat right now, which is a link to the statement and the sign on if you feel so compelled or want to read something during this webinar. But what we're going to do now is I'm going to ask each of the coalition members to read a section of the statement so we can hear it here. And then we'll do a quick reflection from the coalition members before transitioning to some conversations with our dialogue speaker. So I want to hand it over to Miriam Hussein to kick things off.
Great, thank you so much, Andrew. And it's a great pleasure to see everyone here, and I'm very honored to start the statement. So our story of food is one of sacred joy, interconnectivity, dignity, empathy. These values are enshrined in faith, non-faith, spiritual, and indigenous traditions' understanding of food. To eat food, especially healthy, nutritious food, is to experience our interdependence with nature, fully embracing the land we live on and those who have nurtured the food that is provided for us to eat. Food is both a building block of life and a basic human right. Sharing food is an expression of our love, a way that we care for each other, exchange culture and history, and remind ourselves that we are part of the wider world. Globalization of recent decades has decreased poverty, strengthened women's rights, and increased food production for a growing global population. Over the same time, however, we have replaced the timeless wisdom of how to nourish the land with extractive industrial models that privilege profit and convenience at the cost of workers, the lands, and the waters. We have ceded this most basic aspect of the human experience to the sphere of private profit, resulting in food products that are detrimental to the health of consumers and ecosystems. The emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has erased many of the gains made from globalization, especially for women, children, and other vulnerable populations, is but one of the many outcomes of this exchange. I'd like to hand it over now to Joshua.
An unsustainable dependency on industrial agriculture pillages the very earth on which we live, emblematic of unregulated economic greed and an unchecked desire for an endless more. We have become disconnected from our world and our bodies, entertaining illusions of progress while ignoring the suffering of billions. Progress is measured by market indices and GDP rather than collective prosperity. The urgency of the climate crisis demands that we no longer let the pursuit of profits define what is best. The once balanced relationship between humans, animals, and plants has become corrupted into an exploitative and abusive relationship. Nowhere is this more manifest than in the case of industrial animal agriculture.
Wow.
From the confined feeding operations fueling the vast majority of animal production in the global north, to the industrialized cattle and dairy industry deforesting mass swaths of rainforest in the global south.
Perfect.
Scenarios of irresponsible animal agriculture bring untold environmental destruction and inflict inexcusable suffering onto animals. Our faith values remind us that eating is sacred. It connects the land and our bodies. We must align our actions to these values so that we consider the impact the production of our food makes, commit to consume responsibly, and incorporate more plant-based and locally cultivated foods into our diets. Over to Steve.
In this decade of action, maintaining the status quo is no longer sufficient to meet the needs of humanity. The most recent IPCC report has made it more clear than ever that in order for future generations to flourish, we must reorient our relationship to the earth and its ecological boundaries. To this end, we, the undersigned, call people of faith, spirituality, and goodwill to make a commitment to uphold the following principles as we work towards building forward a more equitable food system for all life. 1. Interdependence. Human health is linked to the health of the earth. We affirm the adoption of the One Health model to create nutritious and climate-resilient food systems. 2. Truth. Science and faith are not at odds. They inform, enrich, complement, and challenge each other in the pursuit of truth. 3. Reverence. Our traditions teach us that the earth and the food it provides is sacred and serves to nourish our minds and bodies. We must reconnect our rituals with an ethical and ecologically sound food system with minimal food waste. 4, respect. We must respect and protect the wisdom of indigenous traditions on sustainable ecosystems, healthy food systems, and safeguarding biodiversity. I'll now invite Kelly to speak.
5, compassion. Ensure that marginalized communities and workers at risk of being left behind are centered and uplifted as part of a just recovery and sustainability initiatives. 6, solidarity. We only have one common planetary home, and all life is dependent on it. We should set aside our differences to work together as one human family for the common good. And 7, empowerment. Resilience lies within ourselves. We call upon heads of state and governments at the Food Systems Summit to implement bold and decisive actions to align their country's production and consumption to sustainable regenerative outcomes centered in equity and care for the most vulnerable by 1, committing to the equitable transformation of food systems that centers indigenous and smallholder farmers at the heart of our development. 2, investing in innovative evidence-based solutions from indigenous and faith communities and the organizations that support them, targeted at building the food system's resilience without acquiescing to corporate capture of critical infrastructure. 3, providing policy innovation, educational and business opportunities for underrepresented food system actors, uplifting traditional agriculture and research methodology. 4, building critical alliances among farmers, businesses, NGOs, governments, indigenous communities, and faith groups. 5, restoring degraded land and protecting ecosystems while connecting farmers to fair and equitable markets to produce better health, social, economic, and ecological outcomes. I'll now invite Chris.
6, incentivizing and subsidizing healthy, climate resilient, nutritious, local plant-based foods growing practices to allow competitiveness with global markets at the local level. 7, realigning tax systems to drive immediate changes, such as taxing foods that lead to undesirable health outcomes, as well as taxing excessive plastic packaging, particularly the single-use plastics that are embedded in industrial food delivery systems. 8, regulating the marketing of food and beverages to children, preventing non-nutritious, chemically dominated foods from being sold as healthy substitutes to real food. 9, protecting, supporting, and promoting breastfeeding, which is the first food system that provides the ideal first food to the most vulnerable human beings. 10, promoting and encouraging the local generation of knowledge to address food security, empowering farmers and youth as the agents of change to play an active role in creating solutions that address the context and reality of local needs. 11, guaranteeing food security through sustainability, nutrition, and equity, rather than chasing untested biotechnologies and GMOs to augment food systems, innovating with a moral compass. We are committed to the United Nations vision of transformed, sustainable food systems and the United Nations aspirations to create a more equitable, livable future for all. You may look to us as continued partners of good faith as we all endeavor to build a brighter tomorrow. Back to you, Andrew.
Cool. Thanks, friends. So thank you for the readout. Thank you to everybody who contributed to make that happen. I actually want to pass it back now to the coalition members. Beginning with you, Chris, for a quick reflection on what you read in this process.
Thanks. So I think this statement we have just read is a complex, rich, and deep one. Many comments could be made, but I will focus on the action items that I just read, because for faiths, acting on what we believe is evidence that we are indeed faithful people and faithful communities. A list of decisive action points distill and galvanizes the importance of urgent, meaningful action and signals that the faiths can and will act with common cause for the common good, with all other good faith actors in civil society, government, and business.
Thanks, Chris. And to you, Kelly, please.
So we must acknowledge our interconnectedness with one another and the earth. And as the UN Secretary General has said, let us remember that we are only as strong as the weakest health system in our interconnected world. I would extend this to say that we are only as strong as the weakest food system and the most malnourished among us. Each of us as human beings has immense untapped potential, which we can tap into in doing the work that needs to be done. And we as people of faith can look into our own faith and wisdom traditions for inspiration as to how to do this. This can really be the beginning of meaningful collaboration at the global level for improved food systems that feed everyone nutritious foods. But it starts in our own backyards and communities and addressing injustices faced by the most vulnerable.
Thank you, Kelly. Steve, to you, please.
Yeah, in the creation of this statement, I think we can really feel the multiple voices of faith traditions come through. And even though we may come from many different places, we find that we all have shared values of compassion, interconnectedness, and solidarity with those who are suffering, and this deep desire to transform our current space for what it is to become a system that can provide for the most vulnerable. And we also recognize that in order to do this, we must adhere to the values that our faith traditions teach us so that our actions have the wisdom that carries us towards equitably and holistically healing the world and the people that live on it.
Thank you, Steve. And Joshua, over to you, please.
Thanks. So I'd like to mention a statistic that I think kind of illustrates the unsustainable nature of our current food system. The scientific group of the UN Food Systems Summit has estimated that the hidden costs of today's food systems range from 12 trillion to 20 trillion US dollars annually. So that's 12 trillion to 20 trillion US dollars every single year. That's the cost of our current food system. And that includes food's devastating environmental and human rights impacts, and also the poor health and medical problems caused by unhealthy diets. So we are operating at an enormous deficit in our food system right now. But we can imagine a system where we are operating at a surplus, where food is treated like medicine and improves health, where we grow food in harmony with the environment. And in fact, we don't have to imagine that it's happening in places all over the world. And it's really very simple. We just have to scale up those sustainable agricultural practices in order to get us to a food system with a surplus that actually helps us rather than hurts us.
Thank you, Joshua. Miriam, over to you, please.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So I think as my esteemed colleagues have already stated, we are all connected, right, through shared values, and our actions have real life consequences. So although industrialization has brought many benefits to our modern society and we all benefit from it, it has also unfortunately led to our disconnection from the natural world. And it ironically just threatens our very existence. So I think by appreciating the source and empowering the value of these real connections to our food systems, we have a real chance to create a more healthy and equitable world. It's up to us. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Miriam. And thank you to all the coalition members. We've been meeting monthly or weekly for the past 7 months. We've got to know each other very well. And I just want to give a special thank you to each one of them for saying yes to being a part of this project and for all the time and hours and effort they put into it. It really is a testament to how much they care and how much this matters, not just to their organizations, but to them personally. And for all of that, a sincere thank you. And now I want to transition to the speakers and people who helped bring all this together. We, as Gopal mentioned, had over 40 different speakers from around the world, and I'm so honored to be getting to share the space again with many of them. And so I'm just going to introduce them as it comes up. I'm going to ask a series of questions. I'm going to start with our esteemed moderator, Bibi González, the founder and director of Eat Better Waik. Bibi, you were the moderator for all 6 dialogues. You also have an incredible presence and impact in the food system space. And so to you, I want to ask, how do you understand the role of these dialogues and a statement like this in the context of the Food System Summit, as well as the work that has to follow?
Thank you so much, Andrew, and congratulations to all of you on making this happen. I witnessed this along the way, and it's just amazing to see how it has grown, flourished, and reached so many places within the food system, like in the core. And I think, well, for me, it's been a privilege to get to know more about faith. At first, when I got with a proposal to being the moderator, I was a bit afraid because I am not necessarily working in faith or within faith-based organizations. But it was a really great pathway for me to get to know more, learn through readings, but also listening in the dialogues, not just with people who work within faith, but anyone, right? And it's really important. One word that you asked me now, Andrew, is the value of the dialogue, the value of the statement. And if we look through the statements, in the first line, well, more than there's sacred joy, and I just love that there's joy in all of this, but it's values. It's how our values are put upon what we need the most in order to live. In this case, well, we have water and we have food. So it's not, what I really love about this is that I looked up in a quick find search. There's no word there about religion. And it just is about the faith values as a human being, as a person that lives with other beings in this world. Of course, not only humans. And you're an example of how within the interfaith, you are putting as a common ground the faith perspectives and just going forward in one goal. I mean, we see so many differences around the world with different beliefs, let's say, but you are the clear example of how to move forward. And you speak here about connectivity, relationships. So this example, to put it as well in the food perspective, in the food area, being food our common ground. I really love that it's what I brought about these dialogues is also the power of women. I really loved the divine feminine aspect, and being here, the value of breastfeeding. It's the first food of life, and it's usually disregarded in the food area. We recently did some lives during the World Breastfeeding Week, which is the first week of August. And I want to bring something that Gopal mentioned is just not just being so, oh, this is so nice, and just speaking like, flowers. It's an expression in Spanish, but really speaking clearly about it. And I would like to show you something that I hope you don't misinterpret it, but it's really to understand the essence and the value of this, and especially the value of women. Just to give you a clear why I'm involved in this and why I want to show you this. I'm in food as well because a mother was giving her baby soda in a bottle instead of milk because soda was more expensive than milk. So she thought if something is more expensive, then it must be better. So And then we also understood that she didn't value herself enough as a good enough woman, and much less so the free breast milk that was coming out of her for her kids. So I would like to show you just maybe different and please speak clearly. This is a breast that UNICEF gives out. This is how it looks from the outside. And when you open it, you see exactly what it looks like and where the milk comes from and where it goes to the baby. If we are going to speak clearly about food, we need to understand it without any taboos, right? And really know what the food looks like, where it comes from. And just giving you this understanding of where the first food comes from, perhaps might interest you in supporting that angle on breastfeeding. But after that, the Pachamama, something that was brought here, you have the value of forest, of land. And I just think that this is applicable to any person wherever, no matter what their religion is, but it's just this very clear perspective with not only what's going on in the world, but clear calls to action within ourselves. So thank you for having me here. And I hope I answered your question, Andrew.
Incredible. Bibi, you're the best. Just thank you. That was lovely. It makes my heart sing. So thank you, Bibi. Wow. And just as a personal aside, I have a 1-year-old. She's breastfeeding, and that is just the intimacy, the beauty, the simplicity. And I know it's not always that, but it is. I'm just so grateful that you brought it up the way that you did. And so now I want to move to Dr. Frick. Martin Frick is the deputy to the special envoy for the UN Food Systems Summit. He's been an incredible friend and supporter of this process, and just a thank you for all of that throughout these past months. And Dr. Frick, you've engaged the Food Systems Summit, and I think by default, you have engaged almost every stakeholder group involved in food systems. And I want to ask you, knowing that you have this huge landscape analysis and know all these different trigger and impact points, where do you see the benefit of a statement like this and the work of foods within food systems, faith groups within food systems? And then how do you think, given the entire scale of what needs to happen, how faith groups can help create meaningful transformation within our food systems?
Well, thanks very much. It's an easy answer to say that, if I would look at it from a cold perspective, then faith groups are the biggest non-governmental organizations out there with the biggest reach. But I think that's only one part of the perspective, because faith is something which is deeply personal, and so is the choice of our food. And I think it's a wonderful human signal to see all of the faith groups recalling the common ground, that in every single religious tradition, food is something sacred. It's not something that is a given. It's not a commodity that is traded. It is an obligation. I was in a seminar earlier this afternoon, European time, and there was a very strong statement from Professor Ratan Lal, who is the winner of this year's World Food Prize and a wonderful gentleman and a pioneer in soils. And soil is really something that we are losing at an unprecedented rate. And he said, it should be an unacceptable crime that anyone is hungry on this planet, because people don't have to. And to see the moral dimension in that, to appeal to the humanity and solidarity, to understand not only the concept of climate justice, which is gaining ground, but to understand, and that is something that Laudato Si says very clearly, that the social crisis and the environmental crisis are really two sides of a coin. And that, with this basic need of food, It actually is defining our interface with the planet and is maybe the most tangible part of interconnectedness. I love Bibi's example of breastfeeding. And you said, Andrew, it's the most intimate connection between a mother and a child. It certainly is. As a father of 3, I can say that. But the same goes for our planet that is feeding us. It's the most intimate connection we have to this planet. And we understand only now the interconnectedness of our health, for example, that the microbes in soil are actually exactly the mirror of the microbes that we have in our bodies. It's a symbiosis, and you don't hammer one part of the symbiosis you live with and expect not to feel the results on the other side. So the interconnectedness, the respect for our surrounding, the awe of this unbelievable system in which we are living, which is not only nurturing us, but surrounding us with beauty. All of that is something that goes very deeply into the core of every single religion, and that, goes into the core of every single human being. And so this is much, much, much more than just an effort to reach out to many peoples in the world, which, we obviously are doing, but this is reaching out to the hearts of people. And in the hearts is where the change is happening. And this is therefore a fantastic initiative. And I'm really happy and also positively surprised how bold a statement that is, how detailed and how eminently workable. So thanks for that. And Andrew, back to you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Frick. I really appreciate those words. And I just love how you can't hammer one side of symbiosis and not expect to feel the impacts going the other way. I just think that is something that mutuality, the interconnection, is something that needs to be very much kept in mind as we go forward. We keep on trying to hammer things into place, and we're feeling the impacts going the other way. So thank you for that. And now I want to move to Felipe Carrazzo. He is, hold on, gotta get my notes. The head of public sector engagement at Tropical Forest Alliance with the World Economic Forum. Felipe, I want to ask you this question, and it's something honestly that was prompted in our conversation during action or dialogue on Action Track 3, and this question around value and commodity. We know the connection between forest and farmland, and given the complexities of global markets and the orientation towards profit and seeing food and forest as commodities first, what, in your opinion, is the best way to infuse values beyond profit into our value chains?
Hello to everyone, and thank you, Andrew, for the opportunity. And I would like to also acknowledge the important role that the Faith and Food Commission have had in bringing this topic to the forefront. Normally, on the day-to-day dynamics, we're all focused on, economic, social, political agendas. And we lose sight of this human interconnection that's at the core of what we do. And I think that this, faith and food, as Dr. Frick mentioned, food is sacred, and Bibi has, very eloquently showed us, how it's connected to our own essence as human beings. That's in us every day, and we should use that as a tool of looking at the comprehensive challenge that we have to tackle in different spaces. Now, building on your question and on this specific space of trying to enhance sustainability within the commodities agenda, yes, there's a connection between forest and farmland, but I think that we, the faith and food conversation allows us to dimension an even more powerful connection between humans, connection between producers and consumers. And this should be a mutually reinforcing connection. There has to be a dynamic that allows us these different, groups of individuals that play an important role not only at the end of the chain, in both ends of the spectrum, but also along it. But the consumer and the producer are the anchors that, if you look into detail and you go beyond the specific sector, you realize that their lives are governed by similar patterns. And those patterns are trying to, go about having good livelihoods. Even if you're a producer in a tropical country, you're in a consumer in a northern country, you're just aiming to have a good life. And I would say that most of humanity does that with an individual, but also a collective expectation of good, goodwill and good being. So those ends, connecting those ends becomes very relevant. How do we create a language that allows us to connect those ends? And I think, we have to look into beliefs. And beliefs get shaped by faith, and the way we can manifest this is through values that have been mentioned. So how we convert this in that common language that allows us within a commodity space, but this can happen in education and many other sectors, but in the commodity space that I'm referring to, we can really use these values and use faith as a vehicle to connect these groups of human beings and understand that they have the power to change this in the right direction. How to create a mutual understanding that generates a social leverage for this agenda of sustainability to go where we want it to go. For it to respect rights of people, for it to go into the respect for the planet, that's our common house, and also for us to be aware that doesn't matter where we are, we have to respect ourselves, we have to respect our bodies, as Bibi highlighted, we have to respect our health, and we have to have a collective sense of awareness of how important is well-being. So yes, this becomes a fantastic tool, a fantastic instrument to try to translate a more sustainable production and consumption approach into a strategy for changing behavioral patterns and setting up a new set of preference that allows us to really address the food, the climate, and the biodiversity crisis. That's my reflection, and I think that the success of this conversation is that allows us to see faith as an instrument to connect humanity so that we can really, really go deep into the search for solutions for the day-to-day challenges we all face. Thank you. Thank you, Andrew.
No, thank you. Thank you. And I just love what you said at the end. How do we go deep into exploring these solutions? And I think that is a critical question, knowing that the solutions are there, but do we have the will to get there? And I always see this as a question of a moral issue. How do we dig into ourselves, into our beliefs, into our humanity to do the things we know that we have to do? And I think that leads me to our next speaker. I close my notes. And we move over to Mira Bandor, Professor Mira Bandor from Manipal University in Jaipur. And this question comes from a quick exchange we had just around the power of interfaith dialogue, especially given the tenor of the world today. And so, Dr. Bandor, this question to you is, as an educator and a person of faith, you are helping train the next generation. As someone who was an early reader and editor of the statement and a speaker in our dialogues, why is interfaith dialogue so important in today's world that can help bridge people of faith and those also outside of faith spaces?
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for this opportunity. It's wonderful to meet a set of like-minded people who are concerned and share their love for both food, environment, people. And I love the way the statement has turned out. And I'm sure a lot of people are echoing that in the chat boxes. So thank you all because a lot of people put a lot of their heart into it. I just would like to begin with something my Vice Chancellor just said today. He said that I'm taking inspiration from what he said. So when people put their hands into it, you get nice things, you get things to work with. When people put their head into it, you get intelligent things, complex things, interconnected things that can solve problems like engineering and automobiles and the wonderful internet Zoom that we're having today. But when people put heart into it, along with their mind and their hands, they get the humanities, they get the fineness, they get the humanity, they get people into it. And so drawing from his inspiration, I just want to say that one of the things as an educator I have noticed is that among my own colleagues, because we are adult and we've been working in the world, there's a lot of cynicism about the youth, right? And people just give up on them, like they're selfish, they're consumers, they'd sell their kidney for the iPhone. I've heard this around in my colleagues and a lot of other places too. There's an incessant complaint about the youth. But I want to put a little bit of faith into education as much as I want to put faith into whom I am educating. Bringing people into the faith is a very important activity that faith organizations follow. But I see a parallel between the education, the business of education, or the process of education, the process of faith. Because for me, faith is also different. There are many different faiths, each following their own pathways. And here are the disciplinary systems, the engineering sciences, the STEM sciences, the economic sciences, the business school, the humanities school, the law school. So just like we have many faiths, we have many disciplines in the internet. So I want to draw your attention to something that interfaith dialogue is doing to my students as I teach them comparative religion or interfaith or intercultural religion or ecosophy. What I actually find that interfaith is a model of bringing together two different kinds of faith in dialogue without leading the youth to bigotry or the narrow-minded disciplinary thinking that they have. So interfaith is a model for dialogue. Interfaith is a model of equity. Interfaith dialogue is a model of cooperation, maintaining your difference, yet extending a hand to the other person so that there is a world good. There's a good of everyone. So interfaith voices, I think, must be louder and clearer, because if interfaith also follows the same technique of bashing up those who don't have faith, or follows the same violence that the non-faith or the really valueless consumerism shout at us for, I think, or the bigoted voices, because interfaith is fighting on two sides, right? We're fighting the bigotry and the narrow-mindedness of what faith means to us, and we're also talking about peace and cooperation. And I think so. The kind of the overcoming the divisions is a model for disciplines. When my students talk about interfaith dialogue, they're also learning how two different systems with two different faiths are coming together. They're also learning that science can come together with humanities. That in ecosophy, it doesn't matter if you're a scientist or you're an economist or you're an engineer or you're someone who is a strong vegan. The dialogue is happening for the good, a shared value of all. And I think that way, interfaith becomes a model. So it becomes a model of multicultural thinking. It becomes a model of what we could call a cosmotheandric vision, right? And which was articulated by Raimundo Panikkar. So the enemy that we are all fighting is a discourse of heartless consumption. And so interfaith dialogue and education can actually bring mindfulness of the heart through faith and values, and mindfulness of critical thinking through the disciplines in education. And I think that is where we do not put our students into a line and say, follow this. We don't teach them compliance, because that's what everyone else is doing. What we teach them is lead them to a path and show them the map and say, this is the beginning of the journey. We don't know where it's going, but it's your world. And so you have to take charge. So responsibility, stakeholderness. So interfaith, therefore, according to me, becomes a strong moral an ethical force against the onslaught of heartless consumption and individualism. So it brings people to understand that we can share things. So when I go to my class and do eco-philosophy, I talk about my interfaith dialogues. Wherever I go, I say, you know, I spoke to this wonderful person from South America who's shared about his religion. Do you want to know the story of how they believe? And all my students are eager, they're interested. And then I say, do you want to know the story of how, so you're a scientist, you tell me the story of how you want to think about the world. So that is something I'm very inspired by. And yeah, Andrew has his hand up. Yeah.
Thank you, Mira. I could listen to you all day, I promise. But I'm also looking at the clock all of a sudden. Spoiler, we might go a few minutes over. I'm very sorry. If you have to go do something else at the hour, I very much understand. That's the way it goes these days. But now I want to bring in, and we're going to watch a video, and hopefully the technology works and I don't mess up somehow. But from Mona Palaka. Mona was a speaker on our second dialogue. She is the original Caretakers Fellow at the Center for Earth Ethics. And she is also Hopi Tewa Havasupai, people of the blue-green water at the Grand Canyon in Arizona. So I want to share a message from her. She is currently flying back right now. She was up at 1:30 last night recording this video with our communications manager, Shannon Smith. So thank you to both of them. Bear with me as I share this message from Mona. And if you can't hear it, just like wave like this, and we'll go from there.
Why is it important for our people to be grounded in the traditions and the ways of being in a community? That's a question that's pretty hard to answer, but I'm just going to make some comments, and maybe there'll be some explanation. But you know, our tribal communities historically have had principles of proper living, values about their life, their livelihood, all that they receive, and that's really important. Within a tribal community, there's certain kinds of social boundaries that are established. And in those social boundaries, then it's understood what is acceptable, what are some of the things that are not acceptable behaviors in the community. But that is also extended to the rest of their life. The caring for their gardens, tending to them. And the way that I've heard and understand is that what grows from the earth that is planted by us with the intention that it's going to provide us with nourishment, physical, we include spiritual nourishment that we're going to receive from the fruit of our labor from the garden. And so there's teachings, there's protocols with that, and how that corn crop is taken care of, how prayers are made, how the dances, and how the feeling for the earth that's bringing this life to you, and to be humble about it, that yes, thank you, I'm grateful to you for the life you give me through this food, through the nourishment that comes to me. And that's why it's so important to use our traditions and stand by them and continue to practice them for our survival.
So that was Mona. She sends her absolute best to all of us and to each one of you. And just, I wish I could ask her follow-up questions, but we'll have to wait for later. So who knows? There will be another webinar, I'm sure. Now I want to move to Nate Degroot, who wears an impressive number of hats, along with being the father of a young child. He is a rabbi who serves 2 different denominations in Detroit, and he's also the associate director and spiritual and program director with Hazon Detroit. So Nate, to you, you're a rabbi who serves 2 different denominations, and you work in coalition with frontline environmental justice organizations in Detroit. You were also a huge help on this statement, and thank you for that. What systemic transformations do you think would have the most impact in the communities you serve?
Hey, Andrew, I actually just booted off of Zoom and just got back on, actually. So I think you were asking me my question.
I was, and I'll run it right back. Basically, the question is, what level of transformation do you think would have the most impact in your community?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question. Thank you to everyone who worked on the statement and all of the colleagues who have shared so beautifully and profoundly today. In Jewish mythology, shortly after the creation story in the book of Genesis and Bereshit, a new generation decides that they want to challenge the power of the divine. So feeling spunky and arrogant, the generation of Babel builds a tower that stretches from the ground below to the heavens above, up into God's domain. How tall was the tower? The text isn't clear, but the rabbis are curious, and so they ask the question almost 2,000 years ago. And one answer that they give is that the tower was of such great height that it took a person a full year to climb from the base, from the ground, all the way to the top. So every brick that was baked on the ground and carried to the uppermost turret of the tower was therefore considered extremely valuable, for it represented a huge investment of time and energy. So I imagine what it must have been like for a loved one to set off on a year-long journey to summit the top of the tower in order to add to the height of this skyscraper. So as the tower grew taller, the rabbis say, its builders began to see the bricks as more precious than the people. If a person fell and died, the text says, the people paid no attention. The translation is really like their hearts didn't even notice. But if just a single brick fell, wherever the people were, they would sit and they would weep and they would say, "Oy li, woe upon us. Where will we get another brick to replace it?" The sin of the builders of the Tower of Babel was building towards a profane aim. Whether or not their original intent was pure, somewhere along the way they lost touch with the fundamental truth that human life is pure and that we must always place as our priority the understanding that all of life is created in the infinite and precious image of the divine. So it's not a sin to build, it's a sin to build towards a perverted cause, to build towards any vision other than the holiness of life and the celebration of the sacred. This commentary, this midrash that the rabbis wrote absolutely breaks my heart, because this midrash is still our reality. Our sin is the sin of Babel. Our reality, the inevitable outcome of a society that was founded on the premise of valuing the brick more than the person, or the new invention, the new technology more than the earth. Our country's lived reality of this midrash began, of course, with the genocide and forced displacement of Native people, and was built by the hands and ingenuity of Black people taken from their homeland and brought to these shores to be brutally exploited as property. We know that racism and the pursuit of profit are as fundamental to America as any flag or ideal or any principle that were taught in history books. And while the circumstances have changed over the years, the structural underpinnings of our society have not. So when it comes to food, it's not that we don't have enough. Globally, we know that we produce more than enough calories to feed the entire world 1.5 times over. And it's not that we don't have the technology to distribute the food effectively and efficiently. We can order something online right now and have it delivered by midnight. Maybe the book that I saw someone put in the chat that they just published, right? It's simply that we don't have the will, right? Ensuring abundant access to safe, healthy, culturally appropriate food is not the priority of the power centers of our global society. The priority is profit. And so when we talk about systemic change, right, oftentimes we hear that the system is broken. But the system isn't broken. The system is operating exactly as it was designed. The system is Babel. What we need is a new system, a new foundation, a new orientation. What we need is to be driven by a different kind of will, a different set of priorities. What we need is a system that values the dignity and humanity of all of creation, first and foremost, and second to nothing, to no thing. Right? What kind of systemic change do we need? We need a change on the most fundamental level that there is, which I wholeheartedly believe is the soul. We need a soul reckoning, a spiritual counter-testimony to our current paradigm. As King said, a revolution of values. As Joanna Macy says, who came up in the chat earlier, a great turning. I really, truly believe that nothing else will do. Our central credo as Jews is the Shema, right? Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Listen, really listen with your ears and your heart. All of you who wrestle with the divine. God, our God, the one to whom praise.
Oh no, did we lose him? He was on a roll.
Of a beautiful and astoundingly sacred whole. That is what Judaism tells us. That is what we are responsible for, being ethical and righteous and humble stewards of that oneness. Yes, reverberating through the millennia of Jewish time, we hear the commandment. We are the keepers of our siblings. We don't pledge allegiance to a flag or a nation or a form of currency. We pledge allegiance to the source of all life. We pray to the one true God. I'm going to wrap up here, but yesterday was Yom Kippur, perhaps the holiest day on the Jewish calendar. And I was in temple yesterday leading services at our morning prayer. We read a passage from Torah, from Deuteronomy, Devarim, that tells us that we have a choice. We're told we have a choice between blessing or curse, between life or death, between vibrant abundance and vitality or climate catastrophe, between God or tower, person or brick. This choice, the love that it requires, is not so far away, the text says. It's not up in heaven that we can't reach it. It's not some distant relic far out at sea that we can't get to it. It's not some obscure destination. The text says, no, it's right here in our mouths and in our hearts, within each of us, an inherent and unquestioned part of who we are as humans. And our task as human beings, as an Am Kadosh in Hebrew, a holy people, is to choose life, to choose love. I think that enough of us making that choice and leveraging our power and the irresistibility of divine oneness to inspire others to make that choice over and over again, day after day, in every aspect of our society. I would say that that's the systemic change that I believe is needed most.
Nate, incredible. I could listen to you all day too. Thank you so much for that. I have a lot to say. I'm also looking at time, and we're suddenly at 9:01. And before I lose a critical mass, because I understand that we probably will, two things. I'm going to invite Lena May to join us in a second, and then we're going to get closed out by Karenna Gore. So if you can stick around for a few more minutes, please do. I also want to take this chance to say thank you, not just to the coalition, but also to the readers and our editors for this interfaith statement. Y'all made it so much better. And I want to thank Becky O'Brien, Dan Perrell, Grove Harris, Lena May, and again, you, Nate, and Dr. Mir Bandur. Thank you so much. This was truly a collaborative effort. Your critiques, your edits were so important. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who engaged and helped make this what it is. again, if you need to jump off, please do. And thank you for the time that you brought into the space. I want to hand it over to Lena now, who we had the pleasure of working with throughout this process and co-hosted a dialogue with her for Health Week for the WHO. So Lena, over to you, please.
Thank you, Andrew. And wow, it's a bit humbling to come after all these eloquent speakers. And I will make it very short, I promise. But I just also want to express how privileged I am to have been able to contribute to this statement. And of course, we welcome it very much. I was really surprised and happy that I heard someone that was not muted in the beginning to spontaneously say, wow, and wow, perfect. So, I mean, what else do you want? It's really, I think also some of the speakers said that this statement is fresh and is looking forward and wants to see a change. And for me, and excuse me, maybe Martin is still on the webinar, but I've been involved in this whole long process of the Food Systems Summit for 18 months now. And for me to see this willingness to come together and to look forward and to progress is a bit of a contrast to what I've seen in the discussions from certain stakeholders in the I wouldn't say negotiation, but in the meetings. Those stakeholders more wanted a status quo and not advance at all. And I think we need that courage, like you have shown. So I think that is very important. And referring also to what Martin said about the sheer numbers of the faith-based organizations. I mean, they're composed of individuals, and these individuals are also part of countries and have governments that speak on their behalf. So there is an overlap here of a big number of the faith-based organization members that are also really overlapping with the country. So what you say here needs to translate also to what countries and governments are saying. And for the moment, I don't see that, because your language is really what is needed. And it's also very much aligned with WHO's vision. I mean, so many of the principles that you are referring to and the actions that you are asking are exactly the policy changes that WHO wants to see and is working with governments on. So we are extremely pleased with the content of your statement, whether it's about the fiscal policy measures, the regulation of marketing, and also breastfeeding. And here I speak as a WHO staff, but also as a mother who has breastfed her 2 children, and it is one of my most important achievements in my life. And there we come together to values and who we are as a person, not just as a worker. I mean, that is really important. So I would like to urge you all also to really now use this statement, that it doesn't stay word at all levels, whether at global level, but our regional, cities, communities. Get this out, translate it in all the language, explain it, because that's what we need now to get that movement of citizens that can tell the governments, like, look, this is what we want, this is what we stand for. I mean, faith-based organizations also are dealing a lot with hospitals, with schools, with food banks. I mean, this statement needs to be translated in the way these institutions work, because that will also bring change. And finally, I mean, next week, the Food Systems Summit is coming, and at the summit, there will also be the announcement of a coalition on healthy diets from sustainable food systems, where WHO is also very engaged in. And again, we want other stakeholders to join this coalition, not only member states, but also civil society organizations. And if you're interested, please contact me. Andrew, you have my email, so that we can really use this statement to move forwards and not just stay where we are. I'll leave it at that, and congratulations again.
Thank you, Lena. Thank you so much for everything you said and all the support. And it's just been such a pleasure to work with you through this process. And it's so affirming to hear those words from you. So thank you. So we're over time. So I'm going to make Karenna, you will be the last speaker. She will send us forward and on. I just put in the chat again the link to the interfaith statement. If you're getting tripped up by the need to add a logo, I tried to disable that feature. But if you still have to add a logo and you're an individual, we would love for you to sign it. Just upload a picture of yourself, maybe smiling or like a funny meme. It'll bring me joy. But please don't let that be a deterrent to you signing up. So thank you again to everyone, to our speakers, participants, writers, coalition members. It really has been an honor. So Karenna, please, over to you and close us out.
Oh, thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who's staying on and being patient, and to all the wonderful presenters and coalition partners. This has been a truly illuminating and inspiring discussion, and a wonderful process that, of course, we are still in the middle of in grappling with this all-important topic. Many have spoken in different ways about how food systems reveal the way that human health is intimately interconnected with planetary health. And so I just want to reflect for a moment that we sit here in dialogue with the United Nations. It's no small thing. We want to keep in mind that in addition to the Food Systems Summit, this international body, only 76 years old and with such awesome responsibility, also has upcoming gatherings focused on biodiversity and climate. One of the strongest aspects of this Food and Faith Dialogue series is that we really explored and teased out those interconnections on the deepest levels and with the most practical solutions in mind. The food system that generates nearly a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions through production and transport and waste results in extreme weather such as drought that creates hunger and famine. The same system that drives deforestation of the Amazon and extinction of species contributes to the obesity epidemic and other diet-related illnesses that come from mass-produced food products. The same system that disrespects farm workers and disparages the local communities that still live so closely to the land that they forage, hunt, and gather for their own food is the system that spews toxins into the soil, water, and air that does so much violence to the web of life. And so in looking at these concurrent crises, climate, biodiversity, and human health, we must grasp that they have the same root cause. We can no longer afford to perceive the earth as an inanimate set of resources to be dominated. We must realize that we live within a living ecosystem that requires us to have an ethos of reciprocity. There is no new technology that will make that happen, but there is a wealth of human wisdom. This coalition has drawn deeply from the world's faith traditions to explore how to make that change. They have highlighted that faith and science are not at odds. That is especially true if we look at the science behind agroecology, in which growing and harvesting food works with nature rather than over and against it. It is bolstered by the knowledge of local communities and especially indigenous peoples who are still connected to their own food sources. Food sovereignty and the right to food are real values that save lives and save whole cultures. They must be respected by the Food Systems Summit. We ask that those in control of this summit keep those truths at the center of their convening and take care not to cede power to the powerful actors who have a stake in the current system and even a profit motive to resist the transformative change we know is necessary for life. Finally, I want to highlight again that there is this beautiful interfaith statement that has been worked on by this community, and invite people to read it and to sign on. The interfaith statement correctly moves values to the forefront in our global conversation about food. The United Nations should heed this call and use the Food Systems Summit to advance the equitable agroecological practices that are healthy for both people and planet. Thank you all so much for being with us, and we look forward to being together in this great work to come.
Thank you, Karenna, and thank you to everyone again. I hope you have wonderful days. Please do sign the interfaith statement in the chat. I also put a link to register for the Food Systems Summit next Thursday. I think it starts at like 9 a.m. Eastern time, but it goes all day. It'll be exciting. We'll be there. So thank you to everyone. Thank you to those who stayed the extra 12 minutes. I know time is precious, and I certainly value every moment you spent with us today. So from me and the rest of the coalition members and all the speakers, thank you. And